Welcome to NTV and Socrates TV. My name is Stan Skrzeski and I'm going to be the host. This program is going to focus on a series of interviews with noted philosophers from the Niagara region, and we're also going to have discussions on noted philosophical topics involving people from the region, and we hope to discuss them in a controversial and detailed fashion. Our first interview for today is with Dr. John Mayer. Dr. John Mayer was born in Hungary, came to Canada after World War II, and since then has been an active Unitarian and has been a lay chaplain with the Unitarian Church for 35 years. Dr. Mayer has also been involved in the peace movement and in politics. Of course, I know Dr. Mayer primarily because he was one of my first professors at Brock back in the mid-'60s, the turbulent 60s, and that's really where my memory stems from John. So as a person that I know as a philosopher, my first question to John really is, as a philosopher with your life experience, how did you define your philosophy of life?
Well, I am very classical with my definition of philosophy and disagree with most of my contemporary professional colleagues who see it essentially as the clarification of language and the art of argumentation. I believe philosophy is the search for wisdom. And wisdom I define not as a species of knowledge, but as a species of power, a capacity, so that it's the power to live well. And that is not simply to live in comfort and luxury, but to live well even through whatever difficulties a human life confronts one with. So living well and the power of living well is what I seek in my attempt to achieve philosophy.
So when you're trying to learn well, live well, and as you seek wisdom, is that something learned? Do you get better at living well as you go along, or is it something you continue to search for but never quite achieve?
Well, the answer is yes to both questions. You don't ever arrive well at a perfect life, but at the same time, it's not just a fruitless search. You do learn, you do grow, you do change, and you do acquire some wisdom, even if you don't quite achieve the ultimate possibilities.
Okay. Now, of course, I mentioned John was my professor in the mid-'60s at Brock. So John has witnessed a significant number of years of development at Brock University. And I'm very interested to know, in the philosophy department itself, what type of philosophical changes have you witnessed? What would you describe as the greatest change, say, since the 60s to now in philosophical thinking and philosophical processes?
Well, maybe I should start by saying that I'm delighted to see something remaining steady from the beginning, and that was the emphasis on comparative philosophy, on the recognition that wisdom is not only to be found in the Western heritage, but also in all human heritages, especially the Eastern ones. I know less about Africa or various native traditions, but we have always focused on gathering fruits from as many traditions as possible.
Now, it's when those two traditions come together, do they run in parallel, or do they actually talk to one another, do you think?
Well, both. And I believe that the West has always learned something from the East, and if you go back even to, let's say, biblical times, the latter part of our scriptures is the confluence of Jewish and Greek materials. The Greeks obviously learned from further east. Alexandria was a meeting place for East and West. So I believe that there is mutual fecundation and has been going on for millennia.
That's interesting. You mentioned Alexandria. What would you describe as today's meeting place of East and West? Is there such a center today?
Well, I believe that it's meeting right here in North America, but of course it's also meeting in Asia, particularly Japan and China. But I believe that these encounters are each unique and distinctive and different.
Okay, so the comparative part has stayed, the tradition has remained. Has there been a significant change? What would be the most significant change within that stays the same?
The obvious major change is the growth in size. Our original university was less of an institution and more of a family because we knew one another.
Yeah.
I knew all my students and I knew all my colleagues and vice versa. They knew me. Today, the university has some 17,000 students, and a particular faculty member may not even see all of them over their university careers. So the sense of community, the sense of intimacy has disappeared. Of course, with the large size, you have opportunities of offering points of view and materials that a small community couldn't do back in the early days.
Yes, although I remember that, and I like that feeling of community, and that's why I guess we still know one another 30 years later or 40 years later. Now, you've been active in the community as well, and there's an ongoing discussion as to what the role of the philosopher or the intellectual in general is in the larger community. So this has to be a brief response. So what do you see as the role of the philosopher in the community?
Well, I also see my role as a teacher of philosophy to help people grow along a path of enlightenment. And I should use that Buddhist word enlightenment almost as a synonym to philosophy. And so to stimulate people and not so much answer questions as ask questions and raise problems, that's one of the tasks of the philosopher in the community. So when students said sometimes that at the end of your class I was more confused than I was before I started, I did not take that as a negative comment about my achievements, but rather was pleased.
Well, thank you, John, and I can honestly say you've been confusing me for over 40 years, in which I am very grateful. Thank you.